9 justices, 9 people who agree on almost nothing, who represent wildly different judicial philosophies, who have spent years disagreeing with each other in opinions that sometimes read more like personal arguments than legal analysis. They just came together and spoke with one unanimous voice on a question that strikes at the very foundation of American democracy. Not a procedural technicality, not an obscure legal footnote, a question about elections, about who gets to make the rules that govern how Americans vote, how those votes are counted, and ultimately who ends up holding power in this country. In an era where every Supreme Court confirmation becomes a cultural war, all 9 of them agreed, and most Americans have absolutely no idea it happened. I'm Michael from GunGuidePro, 10 years covering constitutional law and firearms rights, and what just happened at the Supreme Court is the kind of ruling that political science professors will be teaching for the next 50 years. Before we go any further, subscribe to GunGuidePro right now and turn on every single notification. We are a new channel building something genuinely important here. Clear, accurate breakdowns of major constitutional developments without spin and without partisan filter. The legal battles that follow this ruling are going to move fast. Every subscriber tells us this content matters and gives us the motivation to keep delivering this level of coverage. 2 seconds. Completely free. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell. Let's get into exactly what the court said and why it reshapes every election in America going forward. To understand why this ruling carries the weight it does, you first need to understand just how rare unanimous agreement on this court actually is. The Supreme Court in recent years has been defined almost entirely by its divisions, 5-4, 6-3. The ideological fault lines have become so familiar that legal analysts can predict which justices will be in the majority on most case types before oral arguments even begin. Against that backdrop, a 9-0 ruling is not just legally significant, it is a statement. It is the entire court saying collectively that the question before them had an answer so clear, so grounded in constitutional principle that no intellectually honest jurist could arrive at a different conclusion. And when that unanimity happens on an election law question, it sends a message that reverberates far beyond any single case. It tells every state legislature, every executive branch official, every election administrator, and every lower court judge in America that what the court just said is not up for debate. Drop your state in the comments right now. Are you watching from a state where election rules have been changed through executive action or court orders rather than through the legislature? I personally read and respond to every single comment on this channel. Here is the substance of what the court decided. And this is where the profound implications come into play for every state in the country. The core of what the court has ruled touches on one foundational question. Who has the power to change the rules governing an election? How close to an election those changes can be made? And what constitutional constraints govern that process? These questions became explosively urgent after 2020 when the pandemic produced an avalanche of last-minute changes to election procedures across the country, extended deadlines, expanded mail-in voting, changes to signature verification requirements, alterations to drop box availability, many of which were made not by state legislatures, but by state executive officials, courts, or election administrators acting under claimed emergency powers. Those changes generated enormous litigation that has been working through the courts for years. What the Supreme Court has now said, unanimously, is that there are constitutional limits on this kind of last-minute extra legislative modification of election rules. The ruling reaffirms clearly and unanimously that under the Constitution, the authority to set election rules belongs primarily to state legislatures, not to executive officials acting unilaterally, not to courts acting in the guise of emergency relief. If you want to change how an election works, that change must go through the legislature, the branch of government the Constitution actually assigned that authority to. Which politician in your state do you think has been most aggressive about using executive action or court orders to change election rules outside of the normal legislative process? Name them in the comments right now. Here is the part that is going to surprise people on both sides of the political debate, because this ruling does not cut in only one direction. For states where executive officials or state courts have used emergency powers to expand voting access, extending deadlines, relaxing identification requirements, modifying mail-in procedures, this ruling is a significant constraint. Those kinds of changes need to go through the legislature. The executive branch cannot simply decide to change how an election works because it believes the change is beneficial. But the ruling also constrains states that have tried to use executive or administrative action to restrict voting access, reduce early voting hours, eliminate drop boxes, impose new identification requirements outside of the normal legislative process. The principle cuts exactly the same way in both directions. If you need a legislature to expand the rules, you need a legislature to restrict them too. The constitutional requirement is procedural, not partisan. The question is not what the change does. The question is who made it and through what process. This is one of the most important things the ruling establishes. Constitutional legitimacy in elections does not depend on whether you agree with the outcome. It depends on whether the rules were set by the institution the Constitution assigned that authority to. What is your honest reaction to a ruling that constrains both parties equally when it comes to changing election rules outside the legislative process? Type, "This is exactly right," or "creates new problems" in the comments. I want genuine constitutional analysis from this community. Here is what this ruling means for the legal battles that are already in motion across the country, because the immediate case is just the tip of an enormous iceberg. There are currently dozens of election-related lawsuits pending in federal courts across America. Voter ID laws, redistricting maps, registration deadlines, absentee ballot procedures, drop box requirements. Every single one of those cases is now going to be analyzed in the light of this unanimous Supreme Court ruling. Attorneys on both sides are right now reading this opinion line by line, looking for language they can use, arguments they can make, principles they can apply to the cases they are currently litigating. Lower courts are going to have to grapple with what this ruling means for the matters before them. State legislatures are going to have to reconsider whether the election procedures they have in place or the changes they have been planning through executive action are consistent with what 9 justices just unanimously said. The ruling is not the end of the legal debate over election law in America. It is the beginning of a new chapter of that debate, conducted under a framework that just got significantly clarified by justices who could not agree on anything else but agreed on this. And the implications reach into Second Amendment law too, because the same principle, that constitutional authority cannot be casually bypassed through administrative convenience or emergency framing, is the exact argument gun rights organizations are making in dozens of active cases challenging ATF regulations that bypassed congressional authority. This unanimous ruling strengthens that argument significantly. Do you think this ruling will ultimately help or hurt Second Amendment legal challenges to administrative firearms regulations that were never authorized by Congress? Type, "helps gun rights" or "different issue" in the comments. I want to hear serious constitutional analysis from the people watching this channel. Here is the absolute bottom line. A unanimous Supreme Court emergency ruling on elections is one of the rarest and most significant things that can happen in American constitutional law. 9 justices who disagree on almost everything just agreed that the authority to set election rules belongs to state legislatures, not to executive officials acting unilaterally, not to courts acting under emergency framing, not to administrators who were never granted that authority by any democratic process. That principle, constitutional authority requires going through the constitutionally assigned institution, now applies to every state, every election, every challenge being litigated right now. Whether you see this as a victory for constitutional order or a concern for voting access depends on your perspective. But what you cannot afford, whatever your perspective, is to be uninformed about what the court actually said and what it actually means for elections in your state going forward. Here is what I need you to understand about why this matters beyond any single election cycle. Legitimate elections require legitimate rulemaking. The moment rules can be changed at the last minute through mechanisms that bypass the legislature, the legitimacy of the outcome is undermined regardless of whether the changes were made in good faith. 9 justices just unanimously said that constitutional legitimacy in elections is not optional. It is not something you can set aside because you believe your emergency is real enough or your cause is important enough. That is a statement every American, regardless of political perspective, should be able to respect. Here is what you do right now. First, subscribe to GunGuidePro and hit that notification bell immediately. We are a new channel, and every single subscriber gives us the motivation and resources to keep covering these constitutional developments at this level. The litigation following this ruling is going to move fast. Second, Smash that like button and share this video with every constitutionally minded person you know. Most Americans have no idea this unanimous ruling happened or what it actually means. Third, answer all three questions in the comments right now. What state are you watching from? Which politician in your state do you hold most responsible for trying to change election rules outside the legislative process? And what is your favorite Supreme Court ruling of the last decade? Bruin, Heller, this election ruling, or something else? I personally read and respond to every single comment on this channel. GunGuidePro is just getting started. The constitutional battles coming over the next 12 months are going to define America for the next generation. Be here for every single one. Stay informed, stay engaged, know your rights. I'm Michael from GunGuidePro. See you in the next one.